Hey everyone, my name's Elliot. I'm one of the creators of LensNode. Today I'm just going to be running through a little tutorial that shows you how the plugin works and what you can do with it, what you can't do with it. Hopefully this will give you a good idea of what the plugin does. So here we've got some log C3 footage from an Arri Alexa. I'm just going to drag LensNode over, and you'll notice the first thing on the list here is that it is set to camera rec 709 by default. So what this does is it specifies the color space of the footage that you're supplying to LensNode. You'll also notice if you mouse over the little bit of text on the left-hand side of any of these, it will show you a short description that kind of explains what that function does. So because we're in log C3, one way you could use LensNode is you could put a log C3 to rec 709 LUT before LensNode. So we've got log C3 coming in on the left here, going into a LUT that's transforming it from log C3 to 709, and then 709 footage is coming out of this node and going into LensNode. And LensNode's set to 709, so the effects should look correct. Now, they'll look as correct as we could make them look in 709, but ideally you supply LensNode with log footage and then it has all of the data from the camera to work with to create the effect more convincingly. So a better way to go about this would be to put the LUT on the other side and set LensNode to log C3. So we're going to do that right now. Arri log C3 to rec 709. So I'm just going to go through these functions one by one and explain what each one does. The second one in the list is self-explanatory. This is where you select your lens profile. The third one down is a master blend. So if you turn this down, you're changing how much LensNode is doing to the footage. Then we've got the f-stop sharpener. So if I just quickly overdrive this a little bit, just to make it a little bit more intense, so it's very obvious what's happening here, and then I zoom into the center a little bit and turn the f-stop sharpener up, you'll notice there's this sort of like a power window that kind of grows from the middle and expands the more I turn up this slider, that basically reduces the effect to nothing. So if you want the center of your footage to be as sharp as it was before LensNode, you would turn this up, and then that way you can still have the effect be strong on the edges. So let's turn that back down. Then we've got the sensor size setting. So if you were to pick a Super 35 lens, like this Lomo, and then I'm turning the overdrive back down just so that it looks normal. 25 millimeters is a rough approximation of the width of a Super 35 sensor. Super 35 sensors generally somewhere between 24 and 26 millimeters, so we just set it to 25 for simplicity's sake. You can scale this up to 36 at maximum because we profiled these lenses on a full frame camera, and full frame sensors are 36 by 24 millimeters. So that's pretty simple. Basically means we don't need to profile the lenses multiple times for different sensor sizes. We can just profile it once and then scale all of those effects to fit the footage however you'd like. Then we've got the overdrive slider, which I already kind of played with, but if you turn this up, it multiplies all of the effects that LensNode is running at once. So that includes these 8 here: distortion, coma, aberration, bokeh blur, bloom, vignette, color cast, and fringe. Just below the overdrive setting, we've got an individual controls setting. So by default, that will be off. If you turn that on, you can then control each individual effect and choose how much of it you want to see. Distortion functions the way you would expect it to. So you can see the image distorting here. This is probably a good time to note that if you have scale to frame turned off, when you distort footage, you'll see these kind of funky lines on the edges. That's just a technical thing, a little bit of a debugging thing. So I would leave scale to frame on. The next one is coma. So you can see if I turn everything off, actually, we're just going to do these one at a time. This is the coma, and the coma is different for every lens. Then we've got chromatic aberration. So if I turn the coma off, turn the aberration on this lens it's quite subtle. So I'm just going to overdrive it so we can see what it's doing. That's your aberration slider. It's pretty straightforward. The other thing worth noting at this point is if I pick another lens that's really, really intense, we look at the aberration, you can see when you really, really crank it, it starts to split out into these individual samples. So if you scroll down to the bottom, that's what aberration max steps is for. The more you turn that up, the more it samples the image to create a more pleasing looking chromatic aberration effect. Obviously, the higher this number, the more work the computer's doing, so it's going to slow things down. Then we've got bokeh blur. So this is a blur that's based on the bokeh blobs from the original lens. You can see when it's overdriven to 10, it's very obvious. So let's set it somewhere in the middle so it's a little bit less intense. You can see if I turn it on and off, it's happening on the edges, not really happening in the middle. And then if we scroll down to the bottom here, this is where the bokeh swirl comes into effect. So if you turn this up, it's essentially stretching and squishing that bokeh shape to create a swirly bokeh effect. So that's how that works. And then we've got bloom, which on this lens is pretty subtle. So if I set this back, you can see I turn it up, turn it down. It's basically just like a broad kind of veiling almost. Some lenses have more bloom than others. We haven't really profiled any with really intense bloom that looks more like a diffusion filter or something like that, but we will. Then we've got vignetting, which is very obvious when you're on a super 35mm lens, for example, and you turn the sensor size up like I showed you before. So that's your vignette there. And then there's color casting. On this lens, it's quite obvious. It gets very red on the edges there. There's also a setting down the bottom here that only casts the corners, so it will only affect the edges of the image and not the middle. And then fringing is the last one. So you can see how this lens, again, this is overdriven to about 5. So there's a lot more going on here than you would normally see, but that's the fringing there. If you turn this down, it's going to look more like real fringing, sort of in there somewhere. Then just under that, we've got mix and match. So this is, again, pretty obvious. It's just like the lens control. You can say, I want an 18mm Lomo Illumina, and then you could be like, I like it, but I don't like the coma. So I'm going to change the coma from the Lomo to the Super Takumar. And now we're running the coma from the Super Takumar with all the other characteristics of the Lomo 18. And you can do this with as many of these as you want. We've already been over a couple of these. The last 4 at the bottom here, coma saturation is pretty obvious. That just desaturates the coma. The quality turns the quality of it down. The bloom quality turns the quality of the bloom up. It's set to a lower value by default because it tends to look fine at that lower setting. And the lower we have a quality setting, the faster it's going to run. So obviously if you turn this up, it's going to slow down. If you turn the coma quality down, it may speed up. And then the last one is bloom clipping repair. So that's for repairing out of range values that come from cameras like the Alexa 35 that have 17 stops of dynamic range. Sometimes blooming can look a bit funny when it's applied to footage that comes from those cameras. So this just gives you the option to fix it. So that's kind of it. The only one that we haven't really touched on is the depth gain. So I'm just going to switch over to another clip. So for this one, we're in Rec 709 and we've got the Lomo 50mm selected. Basically, if I turn everything off except for bokeh blur and overdrive it to 10, you can really see that blur, right? Now, this depth gain setting won't do anything unless you have a depth map attached to LensNode. There are lots of ways you can get depth information. The easiest one in Resolve is to search for depth map in your effects panel and drag it in. So the way this works is it's a map that tells whatever is using it as its input where to apply an effect to the image. So it uses AI to try and guess what the depth of the scene is, what's close to the camera, what's far away. In this case, white is going to be where it applies the effect and black is going to be where it doesn't, and everything in between, it'll do that effect at varying levels. So for a shot like this, because we probably want the background to be blurry and the foreground to be sharp, we're going to click invert. So now it's going to apply the effect to more in the background and less in the foreground. And then if I open the map adjustment and take the near limit and pull it down, then we'll get an actual black foreground where we're telling it, don't apply the blur here, only apply it back there. Now, if you take the alpha output from this depth map and you run it into the second green input on LensNode, that's how you supply LensNode with a depth map. And then you want to turn the depth map preview off so you can see what it's doing. It's not very intuitive, but it's just one of the quirks of Resolve and how the node graph works. So if you then go to depth gain, turn this up, you'll see this blurb will get a lot more intense. And then if we go back to the depth map and we take that near limit and we slide it up and down, you can see it's applying the blur more to the background than to the foreground. And so obviously, because this is AI, you're not going to get perfect cutouts. It's very difficult to achieve an effect like this, but I think in situations where you were doing it in a more subtle way, so if we turn this overdrive down to 2, maybe even less than that, just leave it on 1. Unless someone was zooming in and really looking at this, it's sort of convincing. It really depends. It's up to you to have a play with and see if it's something that works for you, but that's how the depth map works. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, reach out, hit us up on Instagram, or send us an email at hello@nodemill.co, and we'll see you guys soon.